it? Great.
Right? Might as well get the party started, have some fun.
Absolutely.
Beautiful fall afternoon.
It is nice, isn't it?
I haven't been out, but I've heard it's quite nice.
I just got in, actually. It's beautiful outside.
Walking the dog?
Walking the dog. Yeah. He's walking me, actually.
Well, he's big enough. You could ride a saddle on that thing. And
I know. He's getting bigger, too.
All right. Well, I'm going to introduce you. There's quite a lovely bio that I have for you. So here we go. So all about Brent. So Brent Jensen is an author, a keynote speaker, consultant, and the host of the No Sleep Till Sudbury music podcast series. Your book, All My Favorite People Are Broken. I'm broken, so maybe I fit within that.
Go ahead.
Examines the premise that music can tell us who we are based on the types of music that we are deeply connected to at various points in our lives. As music fans, we all have that special grouping of songs that we have that evoke a certain emotional drama over us, or emotional control, not drama. a little drama.
No drama.
And they make this feel like that we can lift a Dodge Dakota over our heads and maybe bring us to tears. And that's funny because, when we first met, that's the first thing I'm like, oh, you're in music. Oh, this is my song. This concert I went to was like, you probably, okay. But I mean, you know that you're in the music, then they start getting into their favorite concert and that's your whole.
That's my whole thing. I get that a lot, but I love it. I'll never get tired of it.
So you've had well over 200 podcast episodes, and some of your guests have included Hockey Night in Canada's Ron MacLean, the Black Crowes drummer Steve Gorman, entrepreneur and former MuchMusic VJ Erica Ehm, guitarist Phil Collen, is it Colleen from Def Leppard? Collen. Canadian broadcasting idol Alan Cross, Twisted Sister guitarist JJ French, singer and television host Tara Slone, and Triumph's Rick Emmett.
Yeah, so it's just at his house last Friday, as a matter of fact.
Not too shabby. Insofar as, some of the people that you've interviewed and stuff. So, yeah, buddy.
Yay.
And
lucky guy.
Well, I mean, you're really good. I love the way you you interview people, and there's some really interesting. I've listened to quite a few of your podcasts, and it is interesting from a musician's standpoint, listening to the things that they love the most too. So I think it's pretty cool because that's the whole thing about this podcast industry that I love so much is getting the insider perspective on people that we never had before. So it's really cool.
Yeah, and great for me too. I mean, it's awesome to speak to people who, their posters were on my walls in some cases as a teenager, but also to learn about music. I doing what I do, I know a fair bit, but you speak to somebody like Rick Emmett or Phil Collen, and they introduce you to songs that you've never heard before. Mm-hmm. So, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is really cool. And it is, I think it was Dick Clark who said like the music is the soundtrack of our lives or something like that. And there's so many moments. And I love the word Amy, when Amy, your lovely partner, uses the word imprinting. He's one of my favorite people in the whole world. And I think yours too. Of imprinting. She's amazing. I love her so much. That idea of imprinting or just like the emotional attachment for me, I don't know if it's I think I told you before, I sheepishly admit that I'm a huge Billy Joel fan, but the stuff 70s, and that to me is emblematic, is that the word, of my childhood. So it takes us to a place where we felt good, or like, I don't even know if we had this conversation like that. Stairway to Heaven seems to be like everyone, just when that song comes on, everybody remembers the very last song at a high school dance. And like that. So music is really, it's an emotional thing for so many people.
But never say sheepish, because, Billy Joel's fantastic. I love Billy Joel. And that's a funny thing, people say, what's that?
80s stuff. And I think he even probably would admit that we didn't start the fire.
He would. Uptown Girl, definitely. The 70s stuff is where it's at. And he himself would admit that, I'm sure. But yeah, people talk about guilty pleasures in music. And there's no real guilty pleasure. I've been guilty of using the phrase guilty pleasure in the past, but there should be no guilt associated with that. A good song is a good song, no matter who wrote it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I do admit, I do admit it, because it's like, it's not the cool thing. And of course, we've got tweens and younger kids, like, okay, boomer, I get the okay, boomer thing all the time in my life. So, but I tune my kid's actually a Smiths fan, if you can believe it. He loves the Smiths. He's like
Good.
introducing the Smiths to all his friends. So I'm like, well, I've done one good thing right if I've gotten him into some alternative music from the 80s
Yeah.
that defined my teenage angst years.
You've done him a favor. You've given him a gift.
I hope so. But yeah, like, and just like most moms singing to your kid when they were younger and things like that too. So music is a big part of our lives. So
Absolutely.
made you decide to start speaking about music specifically? Why did you decide to go down this path?
It started with the book. So I wrote a book in 2012 called No Sleep Till Sudbury. And it was about the emotional investment that I made in music as a kid. And I thought a lot about it. And I thought, people would be interested in the story, I think, because people can relate and connect with it. And so the book came out, and fortunately it did well. A couple more books came after that. But then I thought, music is this platform that you can use to deliver so many, pieces of knowledge and ideas to people. And when I'm speaking, I'm not necessarily saying anything different than other people are. I'm just using the platform of music and drawing analogies and that sort of thing, because people are so receptive, to music. We have a special, very intimate connection to music. And it's funny because when you deliver these messages and you talk about things like, music and its impact on consumer behavior, or music and how it can help you be a better speechwriter. I've done that, like there are correlations no matter what, right? But it's just such a great platform. And I thought, it is a great platform, and so many people are tied to music in that way emotionally. And that's where it came from.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I took psychology in university as a marketer, and you've probably seen these studies too, where like if you're in, like, say, the LCBO and you're getting, which to non-Ontarian people, that's our liquor, like, that's where we buy our wine. Is if you're buying wine and they play like French themed music, then people
Yeah.
start to buy more French themed wine or French wines and things like that. So from a consumer behavior standpoint, there are, it's embedded in our subconscious, and it's really interesting how music really does influence our behavior a lot more than we even think it does.
So remember that old Sony commercial? It was about 2005. It came out, and it was to hype the Sony Bravia, which was their new TV at the time, and the superior color quality of it. But the commercial was set in San Francisco. It was a bright sunny day, and there were hundreds of thousands of bright colored balls released in the streets of San Francisco, and they were bouncing slow motion, right?
Okay.
Do you remember that commercial? I don't know if you've seen it.
No.
But it was groundbreaking in the sense that it's a very good example of how music controls how we receive the overall narrative of any ad. And what I mean by that is you're watching the ad. It's, as I said, it's set in slow motion. The balls are bouncing, and there's this indie kind of dream pop song playing, seemingly in the background, because you're so consumed by this visual. But really, it's not in the background. It's actually in the foreground, because it's idyllic and it's relaxing, and it kind of puts you in a certain mindset. And if you watch that commercial muted, your perception of how you receive the narrative is completely different. You're thinking like, why, who's going to clean all these balls up? Like, why did this happen? Like, who did this, right? But if you watch that ad, with a Metallica song playing, then it takes on this evil vibe, and it's like the balls are bouncing in slow motion. They're filled with toxins. They're going to explode and eradicate humanity. That's like, it's just the music shapes how you receive the message without you even necessarily, giving it much thought. And that happens a lot, and it impacts consumer behavior quite a bit.
Yeah, and in movies, the music. I mean, I even studied this in high school a little bit, when like the dramatic effects of things, and how like there's crescendos that sort of build up, and it just gets our. I mean, I think it's just a part of our lizard brain or amygdala that just sort of like clues into, touches this emotional base that is like pre-rational. It's like pre-verbal.
Yeah.
To really kind of get us in tune. To your point, right? There's some things, and it's so subjective. Like any art is so subjective. subjective. Where some of the stuff that, as he said, my kid listens to, I'm like, it's like, okay, oh mom, did you hear about this one? Did you hear about? He's tuned me into some interesting stuff. And whereas same thing, like my mom, and when she heard like the Smiths' "How Soon Is Now," she was like, that sounds like a cat. Someone's like trying to drown a cat somewhere.
Oh wow.
She's pretty verbal about not liking that song. But so it is, and it's like just different generational things, and so some songs remind us of our loved ones or times in our, so it's just, and it's very subjective as to what one person likes versus the other person. So people are like, I can't stand whatever genre, but
well, we were so, as kids, dialed into music, particularly you and I, because I always say, music back then was the thing. Now music is one thing, but back then I myself was so dialed into music that it meant everything to me. And so, as you commemorate your childhood, which you often do, you in turn commemorate music, because that was everything for me, And so when you listen to those old bands like the Smiths and, in my case, Kiss and whatever else, there's a nostalgic flavor there that really compels you.
Yeah, it's interesting that it sort of takes us to a place, and again, it sort of just aligns with sort of like, and if there's something weird about hearing it on the radio too, as opposed to having it on your Spotify or on your playlist, like the serendipity of it coming on at a certain time, and there's like, it's like, oh, I'm so glad that song came out. Well, I could have played that song at any point, at any time, but then it just comes on, on the radio, and you get like so excited.
And you'll stay in the car even after you've reached your destination to listen to the end of the song.
Yeah,
right?
and
I do that.
People of our generation too, when we didn't have these Spotify things, that just to hover over the recorder, like when we were doing cassettes, right, and just hover over.
Oh, so true.
Broadcaster to finish talking, so you could click record and to try and save a few bucks by recording things off the radio.
Yeah, that is so true. There's in doing the podcast, I find a lot of really interesting facts, that have to do with the music business at large. And so someone told me, and I can't remember exactly how the story goes, but somebody told me in the radio business that it's, they had there's this expression called hit the post, right? You hit the post. So when you're introducing a song, there's typically instrumentation, and then when the vocal comes in, you're not to talk over the vocal, right? And so DJs that were extremely talented would talk and say, this is, Def Leppard, and right before the vocal starts, they hit the post and they're done, right? But there was talk of record companies making sure that this happened so that people couldn't do what you just described. They couldn't record and have the song right from the, note one to the end. They wanted DJs to ruin it, so that you couldn't record it. You'd have to go and buy it.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is so cool. And now these mixed, people call it mixed tapes, which I think is grammatically incorrect, but I say mixed tape instead of mixtape.
Mixtape, yeah. I do that too.
They're making a comeback, right? It's a very sort of, it's a hip thing. Vinyls are making a comeback. It's kind of wild in a way, because we couldn't get away from the ones that had the scratches. And I remember being a kid and listening. My parents would listen to things like Boney M or, it was always like the fun party, and wherever the scratch was, and because you'd play it over and over, we had like Peter Frampton or anyway, so just listening to it and knowing where that scratch was, and you would sing along with the scratch at one or two time too. And now that these vinyls are coming back, it's really kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's funny. I did the same thing, and that's imprinting, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And did you have to? Were your family? The Canadian thing is, somebody told me, but they were listening to the Irish Rovers.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That Canadian at its best when you're listening to Boney M's Christmas album, or
when it's not Christmas, Leslie. And that happened in my house. So the Boney M Christmas album, I've said this on the podcast, would play at non-Christmas times, like during, and I was like, really? Honestly? Yeah.
At our house, it's always Johnny Mathis. Johnny Mathis Christmas is like, that's always the Christmas tree, like the tree trimming That's where we go for that. So yeah, it's funny, and then just sort of picking up on different things over the years with kids, and as your parents, and listening to their music, because most of the time we were sort of forced to, but now
Mhm.
of course finding that nostalgia and that love of what they listen to, and just like finding that connection between you and your parents, and now having my own kid, just trying to find that connection with him, and he wants to buy the Smiths vinyl just to put up on his wall because he thinks that would be so cool and retro, right?
Oh, he
Yeah.
must be happy about that. That's awesome. That's cool.
It is pretty cool. But as I said, like he's introduced me to some new music, and some of it's not my favorite. But there's one that he called. We actually named our dog Shiloh after Shiloh Dynasty, which was like this lo-fi music, really cool, chill. And I was like, oh, I love that. This is like really cool, like chill kind of music. But yeah, we named our dog after her. And we moved on from that. So he's probably like, "Oh, Mom, why are you talking about business? You're so annoying, boomer."
Okay, boomer.
Yeah. So this makes you, obviously this is like like you said, you started off doing this because like it was a drive and a passion for you, and then you've parlayed it into your career, really, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I have. It started with the books, and I was working in corporate at that time when the first and the second book came out. And then I thought, it was 2017, and I thought, you know what? I would be really disappointed in myself if I didn't give this a go, because I had started the podcast at that time. And I thought,
What
why
year?
not? 2017.
Holy mackerel.
I know, it's been 5 years. I'm on year 5 right now. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. I know, it's bizarre.
And to
Crazy.
get into the podcast, like that's really, really early for podcasting when people really weren't listening that often. But yeah.
Yeah, it was for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I just said, you know what, I'm going to give this a go. And I did. And then, the speaking thing came from that. And it was, sad thing is, like, it was just taking off in 2019. I'd been to Washington. I spoke there, and I'd been to San Antonio and spoke there. And then COVID hit and derailed everything, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah. So,
Yeah.
but I've done a couple of virtuals since then, and I hope to get back into it. So,
Yeah, and hopefully we're getting on the other side of it. It would be nice to think that we are. Maybe after this winter, we'll kind of get back to some kind of normalcy. I went to a concert, actually. For a gal that is terrified of actually leaving the house during COVID, double vaxxed and the whole business. But I did go to the Maroon 5 concert, and it was really weird. I felt like, okay, so everybody's wearing their mask. We've all been vaccinated. But yet to be around thousands of people, even in an outdoor forum, was a little like, so weird.
Yeah. No, I could see that. And you and I had talked about this before, but it's weird that you think it's weird.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a little, I think it'll take a little getting used to of being around masses of people again. And, yeah, so that's a whole other story. But the COVID stuff, I'm sure we could go on forever. So what do you think are some of the misconceptions people have about what you do?
That podcasting makes any money is one.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are any misconceptions. I think that, it's kind of a what you see, what you get, with the exception of podcasting. You do the talks, and people, seem to get quite a lot out of that. But I don't know if there are any misconceptions.
Well, if it were my brain, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would assume that people probably don't even recognize how important music is in their life, and how many. So like maybe the misconception of like, oh, he's coming to talk about music, but not understanding the relevance of how it works from a business standpoint, or like those pivots in a way. Maybe that's where people don't. They're like, oh, I never thought about that. So
that happens a lot. So, when I'm talking, and you kind of key into certain people in the audience who are really into it, and when you say something, that's in that vein, you see their eyes light up, and they have that moment, like they're like, oh, I wow, and then they come up and tell you after and affirm it. But I think that, to your point, misconception that way, that people don't think that music is kind of germane to business concepts, maybe, or speech writing. For example, I took that speech writing gig in Washington, D.C., and it was at a speechwriters conference. And, I spoke to the guy and he said, well, I don't know if you can do this because it's about speechwriting and how to be a better speechwriter. And I said, there's all kinds of correlations you can draw, right? Sam Cooke, Change is Going to Come, was based on Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. That's where it came from. It was inspired by that. So there's a correlation right there. They use the same devices, songwriting, like a chorus, use of a refrain, rhythm, all those things. So, when you present these things to people, they go, oh, I didn't even really, I didn't think of that. And that's the reward, really. People just kind of light up and go, wow, that is so cool.
That is really cool. I didn't know that. It's one of my favorite songs. It's on my list of Sam Cooke. I'm a huge fan of like old like Otis Redding, and so that's just. But not knowing even the context of that, I think that there is so much storytelling in music and from so many different things and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, but devices, use of a beat, rhythm. Obama was great at that. Like the way that he spoke was very rhythmic because he understood. The power of musicality and how attuned people were to it. So there's all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah. That's so interesting. And also, because I've studied a little bit of presenting as well, back to Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. From what I understand, it went from sort of like this flow of like where we are versus where we want to be versus where we are versus, and like the crescendo that is sort of built up and hence why it is one of the best speeches ever.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Crescendo is another device used, right? So that steady buildup is a very popular device used in music, and then also in history's great speeches.
Yeah, and finding that the tempo, to your point of like, which is not so. I'm not the greatest speaker for pausing. Quietly, sometimes there's all those nuances that make a presenter better because they pause and they do so in a dramatic way. Because I've studied a lot of stand-up comics, and none of them that I've ever seen ever really just fly off the cuff like Robin Williams used to be able to. Most of them really constructed and honed their craft so they understand the cadence of the language and how it's played out. And so kind of like music.
Yeah, timing is everything. Think about Seinfeld in that regard, right? Like think about how important timing is to him because he, the way that he delivers a joke makes it what it is, really. That's his brand. I mean, he's funny and he's intellectually, smart with the jokes and stuff like that, but it's the timing, really.
Yeah.
That's everything,
Yeah.
And speaking is the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, people oftentimes will think, oh, I could redo that joke. I could do that. That would be easy. But I don't think it's the same. It doesn't sort of hit the mark the same way. So, so what are some of this? You're like, you interview people all the time about their favorite songs. So what are some of the songs that have had the biggest impact on you?
Oh,
is this a question you ask most of your guests too?
Always. Well, so we talk about on the podcast, the songs that make your skin vibrate. Right. Yep. So they give you the shivers, the goosebumps every time you hear them. And I have a lot of those. I mean, Maybe I'm Amazed by Paul McCartney is a huge one. But, in terms of impact, I think about the very first song that I ever really remember kind of investing in any way, and I was probably 5 or 6, was Roberta Flack's Killing Me Softly. And I just heard it in the car. And I remember everything that happened when I heard it. We were going over a bridge and I remember what I see. And it was the first time I think that music really it was like a bolt of lightning, right? It just kind of lifted me up a little bit. Mm-hmm. So that's hugely impactful, obviously. And then when I got to university, when I was a teenager, I listened to heavy metal and hard rock and stuff like that. Like I didn't really have what I call a musical pusher to kind of get me into, the genealogy of that, like the blues, like Led Zeppelin and the bands, the Stones and the Beatles that came before, all that stuff. I learned it backwards. So when I got to university, I learned about the Beatles, and that had a massive impact on me. Probably a negative one, actually, because I just cut classes and listened to Beatles records all day. But it was hugely impactful to me, especially the White Album by the Beatles. So I would say Julia was a song that I used to listen to it, Leslie, like over and over and over again. Needle and the Damage Done, Neil Young, exactly 2 minutes long, over and over and over again. Yeah. So that, you know, those are just a couple.
Yeah. And there are certain things, I don't know if anybody's ever asked you, because it's certainly something that I think is a joke, or, you know, is one of those fun games when people say, like, if you were ever stuck on a desert island with only one album, what would it be? And I would have to say something like, you know, probably for me, like Eagles' greatest hits. Like, I don't know why, but I never get sick of hearing the Eagles. Like, it's just, I mean, I wouldn't even say that they're my favorite band ever, but when it sort of just comes to just feeling like, oh, this would just be like bliss or utopia. Those songs just, they can always come on the radio and I never go skip. I don't want to listen to that one.
See, that's a big consideration though, right? I would want, if I was in that situation, I would want something with a little bit of everything. And I think that Led Zeppelin's Physical Graffiti probably has that. That would be, you know, because there's kind of acoustic moments, there's heavier moments, there's great instrumentation. So yeah, definitely that one.
Yeah.
It's a tough question. It's a tough question.
So, I mean, and then, you know, I would say that, and if something were on replay too many times, I would be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to kill myself. I mean, for me, it was like I can't even remember the name of the band, but that I Saw the Sign song, or, you know, that song, it was in the early 90s. I remember.
Ace of Base.
Pardon?
Ace of Base.
Ace of Base. Oh my gosh, that was where I was waiting one. It was like, I was like, if I hear that song one more time, I'm going to stick a fork in my eye. So the same thing kind of goes for things you dislike, right? It's just like visceral, sort of like, oh my gosh, like, get me out of here.
Oh, I know.
Yes.
Yeah, so. Are you going to make me admit the song that I could get into a lot of trouble for this, Leslie. Okay. But the song that I'll say it. The song that I don't know what it is. I don't like the song at all. And it's Taking Care of Business by Bachman Turner Overdrive.
I don't like that song either. I'm not a big fan of that song.
No.
I think it's because there's certain songs that have been overplayed far too many times. And that certainly is one of them. It's like, I love Billy Joel. I don't want to listen to Piano Man again.
Right.
Like, I love it, but it's like, that song has been overplayed, you know? Yeah. I like the new, it sounds to like we have like similar, like we like the sort of nuanced songs that aren't necessarily the big popular ones, but the ones that are like intimate to us, right? Not like everybody wants to hear the song. It's like, this is an important one for me. So
that's right. Yeah. I remember when I was a kid, I selected bands based on that kind of rationale. You know, I used to love Metallica in 1983 when everybody thought that they were disgusting headbangers, you know, that was my band because it was mine. It was for me. It wasn't for you or anybody else. That was my thing, you know. And I remember when the Black Album came out and everybody was like, oh, I love Metallica so much. And it was like, ugh, I don't anymore. Yeah. Because they're not mine. Now they're for you.
Yeah.
You know, that's a funny thing, but music's very personal in that way.
It is. And to see the crossover with music in so many different realms from movies, right? Now we've got this big, you know, before it was like a soundtrack that was very, you know, sort of like the symphony and things like that. And now big, you know, people, Justin Timberlake, I mean, all these different people that are aligning themselves with cartoon movies. And I mean, it's a very, obviously it's a big business for them. Yes. And I mean, of any industry that has been cannibalized by social in the past few years, music certainly has been. Am I cutting out a little bit? I'm getting a notification.
No,
Hopefully it didn't last.
Froze very periodically. There, you're back.
Okay. So like, can you address that insofar as I remember sort of, what was it? Napster coming around and being like, as a consumer, really excited that we could share for free, but it's really cannibalized the music industry and having to take a pivot on that.
I think that was kind of, I don't talk about it a lot, but, you know, my perspective of it is that I think that was the turning point and the catalyst for when everything changed in music, and record businesses, or record companies rather, didn't own the records or the music anymore. You know, free enterprise kind of came into being, and people said, well, you know, maybe we don't need, with the internet, maybe we don't need record companies in the same way that writers said, maybe we don't need publishing companies if I can write a book and put it on the internet and you can buy it through the internet, you know? So it was like this innovation that kind of cut both ways, because it was, I liked it when record companies were around, because it was it was a more linear kind of simple thing where you went to the store and bought your record and all that stuff. But it's good to have choice. you know, the underlying principle for me is that you should pay for what you get. You know, you should, I don't necessarily believe in free downloading and that sort of thing. I never did. I think I used Napster the first couple of weeks that it was out, but I don't know. You know, artists should be paid for their output. I'm a firm believer in that. So.
Yeah. And I mean, it's taken a complete overhaul from so many different perspectives, and it's, you know, from learning about, you know, what's gone with Taylor Swift and, you know, her situation, and I mean, it certainly is kind of interesting from a business standpoint. We don't necessarily think about it as a business, mostly people.
Yeah. No, and you know, doing the podcast again, speaking with artists, and it really kind of it illuminates me to a lot of these ideas, that because as a fan, you think like, oh, those guys make so much money, you know, they don't need any more of my money. But it's not really about that. It's about integrity, and it's about you know, kind of getting your fair due. So I don't know. I hear a lot of stories from. Oh, go ahead.
No, it's an art, and sometimes we forget that. Mm-hmm. It's an art form, and, you know, the fear of rejection. I interviewed Simone Denny I guess probably was about a month ago, and, you know, just even putting yourself out there as an artist, and the rejection of, okay, I've got this idea, I've got this music, you know, like, and just having to continue pushing forward until you hope that you make traction somewhere too.
And on the other side, I talk to a lot of emerging artists on the show, and it's heartbreaking to hear, you know, and these guys are you probably heard a couple of them, like Sandra Boza is one of them, Nelson Sobral, like, you know, like 5 or 6 of them that I've heard that have sat there and thought, like, you should be a star today. If there was any justice in the world, you'd be making millions of dollars doing what you do because you rightfully deserve it. But it's tough. It's tough out there. Yeah. Like these guys, you know, like I said, should be raking it in, and they're barely getting by.
Yeah. Which is, it is tough. It's like a dog eat dog world out there. And what makes something like, and maybe you've had this, can't remember if we've had this discussion. I think we did have this discussion. So as a Canadian, you know, the Tragically Hip became our band as a country. And I could never quite explain it to my American cousins. And you really helped me see, or, you know, to understand the perspective of like what made them ours as a country.
Yeah. Well, I always said, you know, I don't know if I said this to you, but, you know, America doesn't want any Canada. They just want more America. Yeah. So that's part of it. But I don't know, like just the way that Gord, a lot of it had to do with Gord, obviously, Gord being Gord. But there was a lot of representation of small town Canada. It wasn't, you know, you hear songs that the other artists do, and they're about like popular Canadian destinations. But like Gord Downie would sing about places like, you know, Sault Ste. Marie, and of course Bob Cajun, but used a lot of Canadianisms, you know, and that's the interesting thing about the Tragically Hip is that, you know, doing things like that, you should have failed, but they didn't. You know, they should have been mocked really for some of the things that they tried, but they weren't mocked. They were actually kind of exalted. And that's pretty interesting. But it was in the delivery. It was the way that Gord delivered it. You know, someone that kind of intellectually sophisticated doesn't typically occupy, you know, a space like his. And that's what made him special.
Well, I mean, I remember when Dan Aykroyd brought them on to Saturday Night Live. That was like a big, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're on here. So what would make, like, I guess Tragically Hip, like they still never, was it a decision that not to make traction in the stage? Like, do you have any insights on that? Or was it like, you know, Bare Naked Ladies became a household name at one point, and they were just like this little band from Scarborough as well. You know, so what makes one Canadian band make it and the other one is just for Canada? Does that make sense?
I don't know. I think that, you know, a lot of the bands that we know that made it in the US, Justin Bieber, that's a tough one. But the ones that I think, like Bare Naked Ladies, you know, changed their direction, right? And they appealed to America. You know, you could say that the Tragically Hip appealed to America, but I don't feel like they really did. I get the feeling that Gord Downie didn't really care one way or the other. And that's the beauty of Gord Downie. You just get the sense from him that he doesn't care what you think of him. He doesn't care, what you think of his dancing or his vocals or anything like that. And that's the beauty of that artistry. Whereas a lot of other artists do, and it shows through.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know. I mean, maybe the next time if I ever bump into another musician, to know, like a Canadian musician specifically, were their concessions were they expected to make concessions to be popular in the U.S. And so if let's just say, for example, say like Blue Roadie or something like that, they're like, yeah, we're not going to go there. We're perfectly happy just doing our own Canadian thing.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know about that. That would be kind of interesting.
There were a lot of bands in the 70s. Like this band called Streetheart. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but they were from the West, and they got as big as they could get. Loverboy was the same. You've heard of them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bands in that specific time period in that genre that got so big, and they trapped themselves in their own system that they couldn't escape playing the same arenas. Like once you get to an arena, stadiums weren't around back then really in that area, but they couldn't make it over the border, so they were kind of going around playing the arenas like over and over and over and over again, and then they just kind of gave up and said, we can't really go much further than this. This is it. Which is really sad. Yeah, but I mean, again, going back to the hip, I get the feeling they didn't really care that much about being successful in the States, and I love that.
Yeah, and I think what you enlightened me to, it was the Canadian stories. It really had, there were so many different things that were said in their songs that really were Canadiana. And for our generation, we were the same age. So for us, it was like that rite of passage in through university and all those other kinds of things that made. But to think like that if they traveled around the world, they wouldn't get the same reception that they did here. It just sort of go back to like what we said about it, like it being intimate for us. Like it was like, that's ours. You don't get to share.
Yeah, that's kind of a Canadian thing. I think that Canadians, it's not a manifest destiny thing for us, right? It's kind of more of a quiet, intimate, appreciative thing. And, hearing the hip sing about things like Jacques Cartier and Tom Thompson, historical figures. There's a weird intimacy associated with that, and I think that a lot of their success in Canada was bred on that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and even if we didn't know it at the time, right? There was times when I'd be singing along and I'd be like, "Oh, who's what was the Bill Barocco?" I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I have no idea who that is, and I was like, "Okay, so how do I research who this guy is and how did he matter?" And the storytelling piece of that, So
it's such a cool story too. David Milgaard, all kinds of like fascinating Canadian history. Yeah. And again, Leslie, like that in the rock and roll context, that should not have worked. Right. It's nerd stuff, and people, it's interesting to me that people, at that age, 21, and even, I guess teenagers, maybe a little older, were fascinated by this, because typically when you're that age, you're very closed-minded, and you're like, I don't care what history. I want to hear about like the, drinking stories and women and drugs and all the rock and roll stuff. I don't want to hear about Jacques Cartier.
Yeah.
But we did.
Cheney Wenjack, and I mean those songs didn't really become wildly popular. Sort of him talking about Indigenous children, but how prophetic in a way that he would be bringing light to this, and then all of the news coming out. And I'm certain that my kid was actually one of the teachers in his at his school were teaching about Cheney Wenjack and things like that. So I mean, I was glad to hear that kind of education was happening in the schools long before it became. Before all of the stuff's come out with the Indigenous children. So it's great that, bands are, I think you've probably, there's college courses about songs, about musicians and things like that. I think there was a new one I remember there was one about Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire, which, it's an interesting song from a historical standpoint. But there's some lately, and was it Kanye West or something? There's like different college courses about different. Did you ever take any college courses about musicians?
No. I wish that they were around, during that time. I would have loved to do that. Yeah, I think that, curriculums have changed so much in the last, 20, 30 years to include that kind of pop cultural ideal. Back when I was in university, I really don't recall any courses offering anything like that in the humanities. But now every college does. Rick Emmett taught one at Humber.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, to get the inside scoop on that would be pretty neat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then just kind of like melding that in, as I was going to allude to, what I was going to talk about before, but finding things like, that McDonald's is aligning itself with musicians now and things like that is really, it's very interesting.
Yes.
Travis Scott, was it what's it, the Korean pop band? Be something.
Yeah, there's 5 or 6 guys. Is that right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so finding that alignment of the marriage of, I want to go and buy a burger that Travis Scott says, he's got his print on it. Okay, whatever floats your boat. But
That's a tough one, because as a musician, you want to maintain integrity, right? You don't want to be viewed as a sellout, but the payday is obviously there. So which way do you go? Yeah.
So you might be thinking, why not capitalize on it now? I don't know when the next payday is going to come. So
that's right.
Because a sellout is really, is me making money.
Yeah. Well, the whole business of music is the landscape's completely different now. You don't get the big advance. You don't get royalties from your records. You don't make money going on tour anymore. I mean, you sell merchandise, and you hopefully can do something like that. I guess. I don't know. It's just the business is completely different now.
Yeah, and it's creating that brand, which is one of the reasons why I even started doing this sort of like video chat, was just finding that getting people to own their brand and stand in their value is something that I see a lot of people continue to struggle with. And I would assume that, as an artist, as I said, sort of putting yourself out there for fear of rejection, for fear of like, oh, I don't like that at all. So like, and creating that brand and recognizing like, okay, so at what point am I a sellout because I want to make money, or I am a musician, I'm an artist, I'm going to stand in, that's my brand. So I'm sure each person is going to be different based on, what they hold, what's important to them, and whether they want to get the big payout or not.
Yeah.
So having said that, that's one of the toughest questions that I do ask my clients is like, so what makes you different than anybody else? Or what are your most proudest accomplishments? Like, I know it's a really tough question, but is this something that you struggled with, is like sort of standing in your value to tell your story? Is that, being a public speaker and so forth?
No, because of the 2 reasons that we touched on earlier. So this is a very real thing for me. And that book, was born of that emotional investment that I made in music. So that's where it all started. And that's carried through to the podcast. That's carried through to the speaking gigs. I intro with that in most of the talks I give. So there's an authenticity there and a uniqueness, but also just the speaking at conferences, and there might be 8 speakers. Nobody's talking about music and what you can learn, how music can make you a better speech writer or business person or whatever it is. People, it's funny because at that speechwriter thing, people kind of looked at me funny and said like, so what are you talking about? And I explained it to them, and they said, well, I don't know if it's going to work, but then when you give the talk, people are like, oh, wow, did that ever work?
Right.
So that's the uniqueness. Yeah.
No, and as we said already before too, like trying to make those correlations, people are like, this would be nonsensical. And then we go, actually, there's a lot more to music than one would think. Like when it comes to branding, emotions, like you said, story writing, all that kind of stuff. There's like so much of it, a part of our lives. And it is such a like the resonance of it. Deeper than we ever think. So, okay. I was going to ask you, so do you have like a wish list of people that you would love to interview? Like, oh my gosh, if I could only interview, whomever, are there anybody that you?
I don't think about it a lot. I mean, the obvious ones, I think that, people that I used to listen to when I was a kid and still listen to maybe now, like, people like who I think are interesting and would have something interesting to offer in terms of perspectives. It's like someone like Axl Rose. I would love to speak to him. I would love to speak to James Hetfield from Metallica. Mostly people that I feel like I had some kind of intimate relationship with as a fan because I was so into their music, not passively, but very much kind of, dialed into it. I think people like that, and another one would be Barack Obama.
Mm-hmm.
He is a fascinating study in just seeing the sophistication in music, and he does those playlists. Have you ever seen that? Like, he'll release playlists of like, this is what we listen to over the Christmas season, or this is like over the summer I listen to this. It's such a great blend of music, and you can almost feel like you kind of know him a little bit better, and you try to anticipate what he gets out of these songs after you listen to them. So it would be really, I think, stimulating chat with him. Yeah. There's a bunch.
Would you ever be like completely like dumbfounded? Like, would you ever get sort of tongue tied or tongue twisted if you met any of those people, or would you just be like, oh, they're regular people, they just are doing their job like everybody else?
You know what, Leslie? I don't think so, and the reason why is because you hit a certain point when you speak with people that maybe you idolized or were celebrities, and then you realize that they're all kind of, they're just like you. So I remember the first time having Ron MacLean on the show, it was like, oh man. And it was funny because I was waiting for him in the studio, and I could hear him coming down the hall, and he was talking to somebody. And I heard, like, there's the voice of Hockey Night in Canada, right? And he's coming to talk to me. And I was like, holy crap. Like, what, and so you kind of get those butterflies. But as soon as he came in the door, he was just like, hi, he was so genuine and friendly and nice. And, that happened to me a number of times with people like Erica Ehm, or, the artists from Def Leppard, Twisted Sister, the Black Crowes, all that stuff. They're just the common people.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes not so much. I've met a few. Sometimes.
Oh yeah, I mean, common people in the sense that they're. Yeah, I know what you mean, and I've only met one like that. I'm not going to say who it is, but yeah.
Yeah.
For the most part, they make you, and they understand the dynamic too. So they do what they can to make you feel at ease.
I've heard that about Paul McCartney, that I've known a few people that have either met with and or worked with him, and they say he understands who he is. Like, there's no, and it's not, and you've eloquently explained this to me in the way that I probably won't be able to verbalize it. You have the gist of it. It's really not about him, but it's about what he represents, or his music represents to that person, if that makes sense. So how did you phrase that before? We talked about that with celebrities, about, people would walk up to a celebrity and it's like they have an idea of who they think they know. I think I pulled it from Andrew McCarthy says, like, right? Do we remember that conversation we had? And it was like, Andrew McCarthy knows right ahead when people are coming up to him and they're like, I love you. And he's like, they don't know me. They think of this character in this particular place. So or in the movie, how did you frame that? You framed it so well.
We talked about Andrew McCarthy, and he said, I can tell what movie they've seen me in based on, how they approach me, and kind of, I just kind of, I have the sense, and he's usually right. But I think that you said, oh no, his response was, they don't know me. They know that character. But
and they're in love with that character. And I would assume the same thing with musicians too, right?
But further past that, it's not just even that character in the movie. It's that time that in that person's life when they experience that movie or that character. Yeah. Andrew McCarthy is a person that has nothing to do with that. He's a character in a movie they saw at maybe the prime of their lives. So they were 14 and they had not a care in the world. There was no mortgage to pay. There was no job to keep. So that's it. That's what they remember when they see Andrew McCarthy.
Right. Yeah. And the same thing probably about musicians to a certain extent too.
I think so.
Having an idea of who this person is, and the person's like, I write songs. Like,
I have a funny story about Paul McCartney, if we can.
So much. I had the hugest crush on Paul McCartney. He's just my mom. And when I was in Well, I was just like, I just thought he was so dreamy. So please tell me about your Paul McCartney story because I'm a big fan.
Well, it's just funny. This is the kind of guy that he is. So he brought his daughter to a Guns N' Roses concert in 1992. And so Live and Let Die was a Paul McCartney and Wings song, and Guns N' Roses covered it, and they did very well with it. And during the live show, they're at the LA Forum, and he's with Stella, his daughter, and she's, I don't know, maybe 15, 14 at the time. And so they're watching the show, and then Live and Let Die starts. And he says, "Hey, Stella, you know, your dad wrote that song." And she looks up at him and she goes, "Whatever, Dad."
Well, therein lies the rub of like how we are never cool to our kids. I was interviewing Joel Cohen from, he was the writer and producer of The Simpsons. I was talking with him last week, and it's like, you know, your kids are just like, "Oh, Dad, you're just so annoying," you know. They really like, see you as being cool, you know. So yeah, even when you're Paul McCartney, your kids are like, "Dad, you're so annoying."
That's true.
Yeah. It's crazy, right? To be thinking like, and I wonder, and I asked this of when I saw, I think it was, I asked this often of different like musical celebrities that I've met over the, like, what was that like the first time you heard your song on the radio? Like how weird that must have been to like be in a place and see, like Simone Denny was sort of saying, like, it's interesting sometimes seeing people singing along with her song and they don't know she's Simone Denny, who's like, and she's superstar, the singer for the superstar song. And how surreal that must be sometimes.
Yeah.
Like hear that moment when your song's on the radio and everybody's singing along, or like you pull up in a car next to someone and they're like rocking out to you. It must be like, "Hi," you know,
Yeah.
kind of neat to really.
Oh God. Yeah.
I mean, you've probably been like in the front row and turned around and seen like the masses of people to see what the singer sees from their perspective, what the band sees from their perspective, and to like look and hear everybody singing the same songs and everybody's just sort of like jamming along together. I mean, it must be a really amazing experience for them.
It unspeakably so.
Yeah.
I could not. Rick Emmett told me a story recently about the Toronto Maple Leaf Gardens. And so he went there as a kid and watched hockey games, and he sat in the North End Blues in that section. You know, that was where the season tickets were. Yeah. And so, you know, he was a fan. He was, you know, an awestruck kid. And then when Triumph played Maple Leaf Gardens and headlined and sold the place out, he stood on stage for the first time as, you know, the artist now.
Yeah.
And looking out and looking at that place where he sat, and you know, it's just, he said it's an indescribably special feeling that you can't really even put words to.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And have that moment to yourself, which is so cool. And it is cool to have that experience, and then having so many people sing along to your songs. And I wonder sometimes, like that SNL episode when they had Sting was on there, and they were like, "Roxanne," you know, like they're in the elevator. Like, do you ever sort of get sick? Like, does he ever get sick of singing Roxanne? Like, it's usually for the audience. I think Billy Joel does, because I've seen him in so many interviews where he's just like, "A bottle of red. I wonder what's on the menu at dinner tonight. A bottle of what?" And then it's like, "Oh, I think they have burgers. Maybe I'll have the French fries." Like, where they sort of just go into like, "Here we go. We're just gonna." I mean, I wonder
through the motions. Yeah.
Go through the motions versus how many of them are like just loving it and you know, just really getting into the vibe. But
it would be tough. You know, you have to kind of give them that liberty, because like they've played that song. You know, you think about Kiss and Rock and Roll All Night, same thing. You know, they usually close the show with that, and it's like, oh God, I've played this song 1,000,000 times. You know, and I got to sell it to these people because they paid $200 for their ticket.
Yeah, and being so excited about it, like then they erupt and they get excited, and you're just like, you know, here we go again. I was even said to my friend when I was at the Maroon 5 concert, I was just like, I don't want to hear new music. Like, I know that's what's important for them to sell the new album, and I'm sure they're excited to play their new music, and they're all like their own little babies, their own little special children. I'm like, I didn't pay that kind of $200 to show up and play what you want to play, musician. I want to come here for me.
It's true.
Which is tough, I'm sure, from their perspective, but
yeah,
because we don't go there for them, we're going there for ourselves, right?
That's it. Yeah. Right? It's nostalgia.
Yeah. It's so cool. I mean, it's so cool. I you know, again, music is something that is just, it's so special to each and every one of us, and it's so subjective. So So do you have any, I mean, I can't believe we're at the hour mark already, but any sort of like last words, ideas, mantras, beliefs, motivational phrases? Do you have any sort of last comments?
In terms of mantra, my favorite kind of saying is train hard, fight easy.
Okay.
When you get ready for a talk or an interview, whatever it is, something that you have to, kind of be on for, prepare. So prepare hard. And it just makes it so much easier. People think, they ask me, so what are some kind of tips and tricks and stuff like that? Train hard, fight easy. Put the work in before, and then the actual execution is that much easier.
It is. And I think a lot of people, the ones that make it look the easiest are the ones that have worked the hardest to get there, for sure.
Always. Every time. Every time.
Yeah. And I think that's a huge misconception from people. They're like, oh, it's just so easy. You make it look so easy. I could do it. And it's like, okay.
It's not easy. And I've never been a winner, like when you have to, you do it. I've been on stages speaking and kind of gone blank, and you think like, I'm dying right now, but you kind of get there eventually. But with preparation, the chances of that happening are minimized. So I always prepare. Always.
To that point, and again, one of the reasons why I even started this podcast is this fear of putting ourselves out there. And this is why I started talking about these subjects and having people like yourself on, because I realized that there's a ton of wildly celebrated musicians, Adele, Barbra Streisand, who have supposedly their stage fright is so debilitating that you think like, but it's Barbra Streisand, it's Adele.
Yeah.
And to realize that they suffer from the same anxieties and the same fears that we have.
But again, common people, right? So two great stories. Like Mick Jagger used to drink 2 pints before he went up on stage because he was terrified and had to have drinks before he went up when they played the pubs, when the Stones were coming up. Rod Stewart used to sing from behind the amps, believe it or not. He did. He used to sing from behind the amps because he was terrified and he had awful stage fright. Now he's Rod Stewart. I mean, I couldn't imagine him being that way. But common people, you don't know. I mean, it's interesting. There's such a disparity between what we see as fans and what the artist kind of sees in the mirror that you might be really, really surprised.
Yeah. And I think for me, one of the reasons why I love having this discussion is because it helps me go, oh, well, I'm not alone here. Like if I've got the imposter, thing going through my brain, and you've got Adele, Barbra Streisand, Rod Stewart, Mick Jagger feeling like that they're not enough, then what the hell kind of hope do the rest of us have? But it humanizes them, and it makes me feel like, okay, maybe I can stand in my value just a little bit more, because if they're scared and I'm scared, then it's okay for me to be a little nervous or a little scared, or just the being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah, okay. That's the takeaway. You have no idea, how terrified some of these people are when they look like cool as cucumbers. Like you have no idea, so don't be afraid.
And it's practice, right? Like the first time I started, actually, it was your lovely gal that was my first guinea pig that I got to interview on. And I keep saying to Amy, I'm so glad it was her, because I was so nervous, and was technology going to work and all that other stuff. Yeah. She's so patient and kind and smart. So I'm glad she was my first.
So I'm going to tell you a really funny story about that very quickly. So when I first started doing podcasts, it was probably episode like 13 or 14. Okay. And again, like you described just getting started and you're worried about the technology and all that stuff. JJ French from Twisted Sister was my guest, right? So we were doing it over. No, it was like the 14th one.
Okay. That's still.
But one of the other ones were like my friends and just like easy peasy ones, right? But this was like my first big one. So I was like nervous about this. It's Twisted Sister, right?
Yeah.
This is a big deal. So we're doing it over Skype. And so, I hadn't really been familiar with Skype. And again, it's like train hard, fight easy, right? Like I wasn't fully prepared. I didn't really I hadn't mastered Skype. So I'm fooling around with it, and he's calling in, and I click I clicked the thing, but before I clicked the thing, it was July. Okay. And I was doing it upstairs in the house here. And the air conditioning never really gets all the way up to the top, as we know. Right. So it's like sweltering. It's probably about 42 degrees up there. And so I figured like, this is an audio only call. So I'm just going to take off my shirt, right? Because I'm just dying. So I click on the thing and yeah, he pops up and I see him. And he kind of like does this.
What kind of interview is this?
Went, oh my God. I went, can you see me? And he said, yeah, I can see you. And I was like, oh my God, can I call you back? And it like click off. And I'm like, holy crap, I can't believe I did that. I was terrified, right? No shirt. He's like, who the hell is this guy? And so, so that was, my introduction to into big name podcasting. But
you're rocking out with your bad self, right? You were what was your song? Party every day, rock and roll all night, and party every day.
Every day.
You were right that you were partying.
Like people, you can recover from that. People make those mistakes all the time. So like, you should give yourself liberties. And I thought it was over after that. I thought like, this is going to be terrible. And the conversation actually went so well, and we got past it. He invited me down to New York, and we had lunch together because he helped me out with my speaking career.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. So it just goes to show you, like, don't be like, things are going to happen, but like, don't be afraid. It works out.
It's crazy. Like I was, and this to your point, like when I asked both Simone Denny and Joel Cohen to come on, I don't know them well. I've met them through my friend Amy Riddell, and yeah, like I was terrified, and it was like one of those moments. Even when I went to go on the social, it was just one of those moments where I was just like, I got it today, and if they say no, I'm going to survive. And it's just getting outside that comfort zone of just doing sometimes things that you're like, in a million years, my brain's saying, why would Joel Cohen talk to you? Right. But he was like, okay. And I was like, ooh, what's happening? This is pretty cool. Right. Yeah. To go on national television, they're going to say no. It's just me. Oh yeah, sure. Come on. What's that? So I just try to encourage other people all the time with sometimes just do it. Just get out of your room. Just get out of your room. Because, everybody took a step at one point, right? Like everybody was a beginner at one point. So
exactly.
Don't expect I can't expect my race is going to be the same as their race. They started at some point too. So
that's right. Exactly. That's a very good point. Yeah.
So, and I think that's a big thing is a lot of people will compare. Well, I'm not like so-and-so, so how can I blank? And it's like, and I think those people, those celebrities that get it, that actually are kind and understand, I think they realize that I was that person at one point too. So it's totally okay.
Absolutely. Ron MacLean was that guy for me. He said, that we had a great chat after about interviewing, and he gave me all kinds of tips, and he was so modest and so humble. And he's Ron MacLean. You think like, holy crap, right? But he was that guy who's just like, he's like, okay, man, how else can I help you?
Yes.
Just a fantastic man.
Yeah. Yeah. And we love stories like that. I mean, I kind of secretly love to hear the stories of when people are jerks too, but we'll talk about that often. And there's certain celebrities that I've met that I've heard of meeting, the people that I've just been idolized, and I hear, behind the scenes, they're like, oh, they're kind of difficult. I'll say one of them. I was a huge Charlie's Angels fan when I was a kid in the 70s, and Sabrina was my favorite one. So Kate Jackson, and then I found that people had worked with her, and they were like, she's a bit of a tough one to work with. They called her to take Kate because she was like, okay, let's move on. She was trying to lead. She was really running the show. So I was like, oh, my Sabrina, she's not like anyway. But that's you never know. Sometimes rumors are wrong. So, but I was a little crushed a little bit to hear that my favorite Sabrina of the Charlie's Angels was.
That's interesting because I'm a fan of that show too. I used to watch it when I was a kid, and there was Jacqueline Smith, and I think Farrah Fawcett, and then Cheryl Ladd in front of Kate Jackson. So maybe she had a chip on her shoulder. Maybe she was the smart one. I liked her because she was a smart one. It was like Kate. Jacqueline Smith was always like so gorgeous, and the body and the fair with the hair and everything, and so that's why I liked Kate because she was always like turtlenecks, and I know, just like very businesslike. So I'm like, that's the one I want to be when I grow up. Is like so funny, the stuffy one.
Go figure. Anyway, so how can people reach you? Your website is Brent Jensen Music, which is
Yes.
JENSEN, BrentJensenMusic.com. How else can people reach you, Brent?
Socials. So Facebook is easy, Brent Jensen. Instagram, Brent Jensen Music, and Twitter. Yeah. And LinkedIn.
And LinkedIn. And your podcast is No Sleep Till Sudbury, right?
No Sleep Till Sudbury. Yeah. It's simple Google stuff. So just, put those into Google and all my stuff will come up.
And the No Sleep Till Sudbury obviously is from the No Sleep Till Brooklyn. Obviously, was it that take? Was it that take?
No.
Oh,
It's actually No Sleep Till Hammersmith, which is, you wouldn't know about this, but it's a Motorhead record. So there's a band called Motorhead. Have you heard of them?
Yes. I grew up in Scarborough, so yeah.
Grew up in Scarborough. So Motorhead had this record called No Sleep Till Hammersmith.
Okay.
And what that meant to be, it's a live album. So it was like they were excited to play the Hammersmith Odeon in England. And it was the lead up. So, we're not sleeping until that happens because we're so excited. So the reason why I call my book No Sleep Till Sudbury is because I grew up outside Sudbury in a very small town up in Northern Ontario in the middle of nowhere. And Iron Maiden and Twisted Sister in 1984 were coming to Sudbury to play. And this was unheard of. Like bands this big did not come all the way up there. They went to Toronto and then they went, west. So there was no sleep till Sudbury for me. I was like super excited to see this live show. That's why I called it that.
Oh, isn't it? So yeah, I had just assumed it was like the Beastie Boys, but clearly complete different. Yeah. So that's interesting from a different perspective. Yeah, that is really cool. But yeah, growing up in Scarborough, I sort of grew up in the same neighborhood as Mike Myers, and we went to at different times, the same middle school. So the Queen headbanging was I wasn't one of those. I was the listening to the Smiths and the Cure and that kind of being all like, wide eyed about all of the headbangers that I grew up with. But
I was going to say, you guys listen to Motorhead together, like on Wayne's World. You're in his basement, Mike Campbell. Whatever his name, Wayne Campbell. Yeah.
All my neighbors, all my friends growing up, all the guys that I grew up with, all listened to all that stuff. In fact, I used to think that Pink Floyd was like heavy metal because I had no idea.
Wow.
But yeah, it was like I grew up on folk. My parents were into folk music and stuff like James Taylor and Cat Stevens and stuff. So for like the heavy metal thing was just completely foreign to me. But it seemed like every single one of my guy neighbors was playing some kind of heavy metal at some point. So
really, wow. Huh. 'Twas the time.
Yep. And then I was that dorky, preppy girl listening to Yaz in middle school.
See, but you knew something we didn't. There was music beyond heavy metal. Like I talked earlier about having a pusher. I wish that I would have had like an uncle or an older brother to say, hey, listen, like the Rolling Stones or, Neil Young or, instead of Motley Crue, Ozzy Osbourne, Iron Maiden.
Yeah, no, I was a huge, like, as I said, Paul McCartney, I was like right into the Who and the Beatles when I was in middle school, which was really kind of weird to be, 13, 14, 15 and just being like, this is the best thing ever. Like everybody needs to listen to the Beatles and the Who. And yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
See, you knew something I didn't know.
Well, I guess growing up, I don't know, being in Scarborough is certainly subjected to a lot of different kinds of music there. There's no doubt about that. And then so we're gone past the hour here, but I think another interesting conversation is always like, what's the first concert people went to, which is always, I'm sure, a very interesting conversation, or what's the first concert you went to by your own choice? Because
Yeah.
What was the first concert you went to?
That was my first one, Iron Maiden and Twisted Sister in 1984. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Very first show.
Went to that one too. In Toronto, not in Sudbury, but I think my dad took my brother and all the neighborhood boys. I think all went with my dad to that concert. I'm quite sure.
It's a crazy moment.
Yeah,
because living that far up north, it was just like to see these people like in the same room as you. It was like otherworldly. What was yours?
Mine was, and I love to tell this story because my parents did love music and like they were young. So I was on a mountaintop in Aspen, Colorado, and it was John Denver. And John Denver was doing a concert for the deaf.
Wow.
And I don't know how my parents knew about it, but it was like, I remember being 5 years old And and John Denver, when he's walking through the crowd, having beers with people, and
No way.
And so the concert for the deaf people that were there, or the hearing impaired people that were there, had put their hands on the stage.
Oh,
celebrations. Yeah.
That's so great.
That's so cool. Yeah.
I love that.
Rocky Mountain High and all those different songs, and that was just such a and just even being a small child, having that as a first memory was pretty cool. And then
you were lucky.
I was lucky. My parents did like music a lot, so I did see Peter Frampton when I was a kid too. And they took us to at Ontario Place. I think Peter Frampton had played at the Old Forum. I'm quite sure. My parents took us to lots of different concerts.
Wow.
So yeah, I was kind of lucky from that perspective.
Good for them. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, and then my first concert on my own was at Kingswood Music Theater, and it was the Go-Go's.
Oh.
Now that I've seen there was like a documentary on the Go-Go's, I feel even cooler that they were my first choice band, because they were really poppy and a girl band and all that other stuff. But to know that their roots were really in sort of the punk rock era, I feel a little bit like, oh, I really was a rebel, which really wasn't the reason why I went. But realizing that, because I love ska music and I love that kind of stuff, that I'm like, oh, well, that makes sense now that I've seen sort of like I've seen their documentary. That makes sense why I love them so much, just because I do love that kind of genre.
You should read Kathy Valentine's book.
Okay.
From the Go-Go. She was on the show talking about it. I don't know if you listened to that one, but it was gritty, man. The Go-Go's were not, a cheeky kind of apple pie band. They were gritty punk urchins. Yeah.
They were. When I saw that. I saw that interview, I was really shocked to sort of see how, I don't remember which one it was really addicted to drugs, and they were they were just wild women. They were wild.
Oh, they were.
And foraging new territory in a male dominated, it was very male dominated at that point, and to be edgy and rebellious and all those other things. And they were babies. They were kids.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, I always love talking with you, Brent. I really do appreciate
Likewise.
the time to chat with me today about this, and so I hope people reach out to you and follow your podcast, listen to all your interesting stories, and just reaching out to you for any kind of speaking gigs.
I'm available. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I enjoy talking to you too, as you know, and this is great. I really appreciate the opportunity. This is a lot of fun. Good chat.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll talk to you soon.
You bet.
Okay. Bye for now.
Right. Take care.